I'm Jacob Kruger, and this is the Write Your Screenplay podcast. This episode is part 2 of my Lessons from Sundance podcast, where we are going to be looking at some of the best films that I saw here at Sundance, talking about what we can learn from them as screenwriters. I promise I'm not going to spoil the movies for you, but I am going to teach you a lot of things that I learned from them that you can apply to your own writing. So stay tuned. It's going to be a great ride. The next movie we are going to talk about in this series is a nice little horror movie called Together. Together is a body horror movie that's about disorganized attachment. So to understand the inception of this film, I got to talk to you a little bit about attachment theory. Now, I'm going to way oversimplify this. If you struggle with relationships, or if you're writing characters who struggle with relationships, it's really valuable to know this stuff. The kind of quintessential book on attachment theory is called Attached. There's also a really beautiful book if you're wrestling with attachment wounds called Healing Our Attachment Wounds. It will help you understand how this works on a much more profound level. But on the simplest level, there are 3 forms of attachment wounds. And these wounds actually originate in our childhood. They manifest in our adulthood, but they originate in our childhood. And the first kind of attachment wound is called anxious attachment. What happens in anxious attachment is that in relationship, the person is always afraid of being abandoned. They are always afraid of being left. And the way that they react to that fear of being left, which dates all the way back to being a helpless child, afraid of being abandoned by mom or whoever the mother figure was. That feeling, through whatever traumas happened way back when, that feeling can, in some cases, carry through, where the anxiety about being abandoned and literally feeling like you're going to die are carried by the person into their adulthood. And in relationships, they try to cling on and pull close. They cannot let go. They are anxious about being abandoned, cheated on. They can be jealous, right? But the simple way of understanding is a fear. It's a need to pull close. The second kind of attachment wound is exactly the opposite, called avoidant attachment. And the way avoidant attachment works is they want to push away. Now, what's really interesting, if you really read this theory, the fear is the same. The fear is still abandonment. It's just the reaction is the opposite. And so what an avoidantly attached person does is they want to be in a relationship, but as soon as one occurs, they push away. And so you have this push-pull, and there's a cycle that's kind of a famous cycle in psychology where avoidance and anxious, they mistake the push-pull they feel between each other as love. And it can create really traumatic relationships where one is pushing and the other's pulling, and the more one pushes, the more the other pulls. And it can become a really devastating cycle for both of them unless those wounds are actually healed. The third kind of attachment wound is called disorganized. In disorganized attachment, the person in a relationship actually does both. They alternatively pull in and push away, and pull in and push away. And the characters we meet in Together, from the very beginning, before any of the horror starts, are doing this to each other in their relationship. They are alternatively pulling and pushing. Now, at the very beginning, as we first meet them, it seems like primarily she's the anxious, right? She is trying to pull her husband closer, and he's the avoidant, right? He doesn't want to have sex with her. He loves her, but he wants to chase an old dream of being a rock star, even though he's kind of aged out of that. And she wants them to move to a quiet place in the woods where they can live a nicer life and have a family. And she's trying to build this home, and he's trying to go on this adventure. She's being anxious. He's being avoidant. But as the movie progresses, we start to see them flip and flop through the horror as it evolves. And we start to realize these both may be disorganized, alternately pushing and pulling. Now, of course, the kind of attachment that we're actually looking for is something called secure attachment. And what secure attachment does is basically weathers the storm pretty well. It's neither anxious or avoidant. That doesn't mean a secure person can't feel anxious or can't feel avoidant, but in general, they feel safe in relationships. They don't fear abandonment, and therefore they neither have the need to pull in or to push away. They're not concerned with engulfment, and they are not concerned with abandonment. So engulfment is the fear that most avoidants will name. Abandonment is the fear that most anxious will name. And a securely attached person is not really that concerned with either. And here's a really cool thing. Now, the movie doesn't actually fully go here, but this is the really cool thing if you get into this attachment theory, is that actually the human system is built for secure attachment, right? It needs to be, right? For survival. We need babies to be able to attach to their parents and vice versa. The human system is actually built for secure attachment, but the traumas that we go through can disrupt that. And so the system actually wants to resolve towards secure. And the problem is that our fears of engulfment or abandonment, or in this case, both at the same time, interrupt our natural evolution towards security. And in fact, if you put either an avoidant or an anxious person in a relationship with a securely attached person, they tend to move towards security as well. This is stuff that you can actually heal in your own life, and stuff you can actually heal for your characters. Now, anytime you're building a relationship, you need to be aware of this stuff, right? Because anxious and avoidant attachment are happening in all of your relationships, unless you're very, very lucky and you and your partner or your character and their partner are both securely attached, which can be beautiful. Most of us are somewhere on the spectrum of either one of these or both of these, or the disorganized where we do both of them. And all of us are actually seeking that place of secure attachment because that's where our system is built towards. And so this ends up becoming the structure of the movie. These characters, they've moved to their dream house, even though he's pushing away and she's pulling close. And they go on a hike and they fall into a cave. And in this cave, there is a pool of water. And at the very, very beginning of the movie, we've seen two dogs drink from this water and literally consume each other. And they decide the best thing to do is to drink from this puddle. We've been talking about externalizing the internal with the form and function of chasers, the externalization of the internal problem in Ricky, the magical realism embodiment of the state of grief in The Thing with Feathers. Now we're seeing it done in a different way through horror, right? So these characters both alternately feel abandonment and engulfment. They drink from the water and they start to stick together. And because it's a body horror movie, which starts as just a little sticky, soon becomes their bodies actually merging with each other. In fact, there's a horrifying scene where they literally need to hack through each other's arms with an electric saw in order to pull themselves apart. And all kinds of wonderful, exciting horror sequences where they're dragging across the room towards each other or pushing away from each other, right? It's an externalization of that disorganized attachment. He wants to escape. No, he wants to come close. No, she wants to push away. No, she wants to come close. And in fact, where does it all culminate with? It's all going to culminate with her saying, I don't want to die, which is actually the fear at the root of all three of these attachment wounds. This fear that abandonment will lead to death, that engulfment will lead to death. And out of that, these characters need to make a new decision. Now, I'm not sure if the decision that they make is something that I would call secure attachment. After all, it is a horror movie, right? But they do need to make a choice about what kind of relationship they actually want to have. They just need to make it, in this movie, in body horror terms. The final movie we're going to be talking about in this podcast is Didn't Die by Paul Gleason and Mira Minon, who, again, I hope I'm not butchering her name. Mira also directed the film, and her husband, who's her co-writer and cinematographer. And Didn't Die is a super, super, super low budget black and white zombie movie. Now, we have been talking about externalizing the internal, right? We've been talking about form is function. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the inception of this film, where the idea came from. This all began because they had a baby. In fact, the baby is the baby in the movie. And it began with this question that she was asking herself as a mother. Now, Mira has worked on shows like The Walking Dead. She has a big history in the world of zombie movies and shows. She understands the genre, right? But when you're working in a genre as popular as zombie movies, you got to have something that differentiates your film. Just like when we talked about Ricky, right? Ricky's got to be differentiated. Ricky needs to be differentiated from every other movie depicting the black prison experience. Just like Chasers needs to be differentiated from every other movie following, the party scene of aspiring actors in Los Angeles, right? This is not Swingers. This is Chasers. In the same way, The Thing with Feathers needs to distinguish itself from every other movie about grief, right? Together needs to distinguish itself from every other horror movie about relationships. This is not A Quiet Place. This is Together, even though they're both horror movies about relationships. Quiet Place is about dad who can't say I love you. Together is about a couple that alternatively pushes and pulls, that fears engulfment and abandonment from each other, blown up into a horror movie. And here we're seeing it again. So Mira begins with this question. She's just had a baby. She's living in a post-COVID world. We've just gone through COVID. And she's seeing the effects of climate change. And she's asking herself, how do I find hope in a dying world? How do I find hope for my child in a dying world? How can I be a good mother to this child in a dying world? Now, again, we've talked about this idea of form as function, right? So out of this question that she does not know the answer to comes this horror movie, zombie movie. And how does it work? Well, in a lot of ways, the structure of Didn't Die is almost like a mumblecore version of a zombie movie. She makes some really strong choices that we don't normally see. The first choice, right? Generally with zombies, you're always trying to figure out how are we going to make them scarier than the zombies we've seen before? Are they faster? Are they smarter? Do they have plants coming out of their mouth like in The Last of Us? How do we make zombies different? How do we make them scarier? Well, she makes the choice to go the other direction. These zombies, they sleep during the day, right? You don't even have to worry about them. And even when they're alive, they're relatively easy to kill, right? Now, if they bite you, she calls them biters. If they bite you, you're screwed. But generally, they move pretty slow. They're not very exciting zombies. They're easy to kill. And these characters are trying to go about their lives. In this way, kind of like early COVID or COVID denier COVID, right? It's, hey, we're going to go about our lives and this sucks, but we're going to go about our lives. And so she ends up doing this kind of really like slice of life, like, this is not edgy. In fact, there's even a line where the main character says, I thought in the apocalypse I was going to be really fit, right? But she's not. It's not necessary. In fact, she's a podcaster. And what she's doing is creating a podcast called Didn't Die, right? This is the main forward structure of the piece. She's got this podcast called Didn't Die that she is traveling around and recording and then going home and editing and sticking up on the radio because, hey, we all need followers, even in the zombie apocalypse. But there's this problem of a baby. See, in the very first scene, we don't even know we're in a zombie movie yet. In fact, we think we're in a relationship story. The wife doesn't want to go to her mother-in-law's house because she doesn't think that the house is secure. And we're like, wow, she's really overreacting. Like, how how overprotective of this child is she, until we see the zombie lying on the ground and the dad kind of casually kills the zombie. Right? So we get this really interesting introduction to the world that's basically going like, no, this is not about scary zombies. Right? This is about relationships, family relationships, how do you raise a child kind of relationships that happen to happen inside of the world of a zombie movie. This is a movie about how can you be a mom in a dying world, not how do you kill the zombies, how do you get away from the zombies, not the action chase sequence. And in a lot of ways, like The Thing with Feathers, it dips into those zombie conventions, and it has to. Because just like in The Thing with Feathers, if you promise us horror and you don't give it to us, we're going to be pissed off. The same thing is true here. If you promise us zombies and we don't get some badass action biting sequences, we're going to be pissed off. But that's not where the focus is. That's not the world we're starting in. Now, like climate change and like COVID, the zombies are changing. And they're getting worse, right? They are evolving. Now, again, the main focus of the movie, till we get to the end, is not evolve zombies. But there's a new problem, which is the zombies, some of them, a couple of them, seem to be moving around during the day, and they're not supposed to do that. They seem to be getting a little bit faster and maybe even a little smarter. So in the opening sequence, we're watching this family be very, very casual about their baby and these zombies that they have to kill. Because it's daytime. But then suddenly something comes up from behind in the day and kills both parents, leaving only the child. We don't even know the child's alive. And the child, again, I'm only giving away the beginning, is going to end up getting rescued by some dude that's going to turn out to be the ex-boyfriend of the podcaster. And he doesn't want a child, and she doesn't want him. He is a serial cheater. And although he may be one of the few men left on Earth who isn't related to her, he's a total slimeball. In fact, the very first thing he does is hands her the baby and then makes an excuse and tries to run away and leave her to deal with it, right? So we have the problem of the baby. We have the problem of family, right? She's living with her brother and her sister-in-law at their house. Suddenly she's bringing a baby and an ex-boyfriend into that world, right? There's a younger brother who is helping her with her podcast, but who's afraid to kill the biters. He has some of his past, but all of this is about the baby, right? And so what ends up happening is that we take the focus that we're used to being focused on the zombies and how badass can we make the zombies. And yes, we're still going to do that. By the end, there's going to be some badass zombie shit. There has to be. We go, cool. What if we go over here? What if we don't look at the horror? What if we look at the different ways that these characters create beauty in a dying world? Whether that's the brother and his wife dressing up fancy and playing songs on the piano. Whether that is her podcast bringing people together in an absolutely hilarious scene where she's trying to get people to share their inspiration, and instead they're just sharing the horror that they've been through, but in a very kind of casual way, very mumblecore-y kind of way, right? Not melodramatic at all. And you're laughing, but what they're saying is so disturbing, right? That what we're going to do is we're going to kind of sit in these scenes and not have this strong narrative drive, but we are going to have the problem of the baby. And do we even want the baby? Can we even raise the baby? And is the baby deaf? Can we actually become the parents that can protect the baby in a world that is dying? And is that even our job, or is our job something else? So we end up with this kind of silly, quiet zombie movie. One of the really interesting things about the way it's built is that this film is actually mostly improv, and please don't do this unless your cast is as good as this cast, and unless your cast is as experienced as this cast, because improving scenes with casts that aren't trained, a better way to say it, or improving scripts when you don't understand structure at a profound level is going to leave you with a mess in the editing room. But in this case, what she actually did was she built a 40-page outline where she built out the structure of the scenes, almost like Larry David does in Curb Your Enthusiasm. She built out the structure of what's happening. And then through an extensive process of rehearsal and trying different things and knowing that they could fail, she allowed these writers to actually evolve what happened in the scenes, from choosing their own costuming and then using that costuming to tell the story. So for example, there's a headband that ends up being integrated into the story. It was literally something the character put on. The bow tie was literally something that the character put on. There happened to be a piano in the room, and the actors came up with the idea of, what if we played some songs to each other? Hey, can you sing? Yeah. Can you play the piano? Yeah. Now, I am strongly suggesting that you do not improvise with your actors unless you are an seasoned, experienced director like she is, unless you have a family of actors like she does, people that she knows well, that she's worked with before, and that they have tremendous training, and unless you are a master of structure, do not improvise with your actors. However, do improvise with your characters. See, this is the amazing thing. When we actually trust our characters, just the way that Mira trusted her actors, they show up with little gifts. And oftentimes our urge is to go like, who cares if you're in a bow tie? Who cares if there's a piano? Who cares if you're a podcaster? The whole podcasting idea came from, she was casting her friend, and her friend's a stand-up comic, and so she's always got a microphone. She's great with a microphone. She's like, I want to capture that in some way. So she became a podcaster, right? If you don't take the little gifts that your characters bring you when you show up on the page, you're making a terrible mistake. And this is the mistake that most of us make with an outline. We've got our 40-page outline, and we know we're making a zombie movie, and that means specific things are supposed to happen. So, oh my God, how do I make my zombies badass? How do I make my zombies more badass? As opposed to going like, well, what's the gift that's already here? The gift that's already here is, I just want to be a mom, but I'm afraid because I'm losing hope for the future of my world. And what if the zombies evolved more like the plagues that we're seeing now, right? Where it's not all at once something's terrifying, where rather it evolves slowly over time, becoming slightly worse and slightly worse and slightly worse. And we're building up defenses, trying to figure out how we're going to deal with them and how our world is going to change. What if instead of going like, no, I don't care about the piano because we're trying to get to this scene, if you went, there's a piano, what if we played it? And how does that fit in with the theme? How are those characters trying to build a world of hope inside of a dying world? Character shows up in a headband. It's not just a prop. How do you use that headband? How is it going to matter later? You're dealing with being a young mom. Well, stick the baby in the movie and watch everyone go through the same challenges you're going through in different ways. Some who go, of course we're going to make it. Some who go, that baby is death. Some who goes, I don't even want a child. How does a baby bring a broken relationship back together? So this is the concept that I want to leave you with. We've talked about a lot of different ideas. We've talked about form and function being one and the same. We've talked about, rather than coming up with premises that we pop on top of our scripts, rather allowing the differentiating elements to grow out of our theme, of the little gifts our characters show up with, of our internalized feelings. We've talked about externalizing the internal and the different ways we can do that. And we've talked about these genre conventions that we can both play with and against as we build our films. So I hope that you check out all of these movies. And I hope that you will continue, as I do, to learn from every film you watch, whether it is inside of your genre or outside of it. That what films really are for us as writers, as a way of externalizing the internal in ourselves. There is a reason that we became writers, just like there's a reason that these wonderful screenwriters and directors and filmmakers that we've been talking about became writers. They became writers not to show off that they can do something challenging. Yes, they did. Yes, they did do things challenging, but not to show off that they could do things that were challenging. They became writers not to make $1 million, certainly not here at Sundance, right? They became writers because they had questions feelings, challenges, psychological concerns, roadblocks that they were trying to make sense of as artists. And by taking their characters on these journeys where form is function, where genre and conventions and the way it's shot and the structure are all built around a unified theme that grows out of the little gifts that our characters or our actors bring, right? By doing this, they didn't just take themselves on a journey. They also took us on a journey that hopefully allows us to have a slightly clearer vision of ourselves and of our world. So I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. If it is helping your writing, then come study with us. We have a free class every Thursday Night Writes, as well as an incredible program called ProTrack that will pair you one-on-one with a professional writer who will mentor you through your entire career, meet with you every week or every other week, and give you the guidance you need to get to where you need to go, just like these wonderful filmmakers from Sundance.